So welcome back. The TM Forum held its annual US event the week before last in Dallas. My colleagues Patrick Kelly, Grant Lenihan were on site and very much part of the event. And delighted to have Patrick and Grant here today to give me their perspectives on the proceedings. Patrick, I know you and Grant already put out a research note on the event, but can you give listeners a sense of what was uppermost in minds at DTW Innovate Americas?
Yeah, sure, Robert. First of all, I'll just give our listeners just a backdrop on the TMF Innovate event in Dallas. A little bit smaller than the Copenhagen event that the three of us were at back in June. So there were, according to the forum, there were about 1,100 registered folks to attend, and I felt like a little bit less than that showed up to the event. It was at Gillies, which is a popular place in Dallas. So somewhat informal. It was less of a rush than like a Mobile World Congress. So we had a chance to get around and talk to pretty much most of the operators and the suppliers that were exhibiting there. And so, as you said, we put out a research note. I think on the themes, data foundations was a big theme. That being graph database and the ontology, the relationship between network service and the customer. There was some both demos and presentations around digital twins and persistent inventory, which is a theme that Appledore has been covering for quite a few years now. The one other thing that I would just note is there was a lot of discussion around AI and automation, as there was in Copenhagen. What I would say is most of the practical applications that I noted were still around generative AI, just basically putting a natural language front end on both the demos that we saw and a lot of what was being deployed today, and less around agentic AI, which is still in the early stages of both commercializing product, but also something that Grant and I are looking at in some current research that we have going on around the relationship between how agents will get used with automation in the network. And that's where we're kind of looking at how that develops over the next year. So we've got some research coming out in November in and around that topic.
Yeah, picking up on what Patrick was saying, one of the things that I was really observing was a maturation of what we saw in Copenhagen as well, which was, rather than talking about AI or agentic AI on its own as sort of the panacea and the answer, there was much more discussion about inventory, which becomes informed topology, which gets very structured data on services and customers added. And in fact, the two ideas of inventory moving toward topology and digital twin and getting your data and structuring it, making sure that it's relevant, concise, are merging into one unit, which is a topology informed set of data. And voila, you have an embryonic, to be sure, digital twin. And, those ideas were coming out in Copenhagen. We were seeing more of them in use here in Dallas. Mm-hmm. And also, I think Patrick's very right that the use of AI is starting with generative AI, but also starting with agent type things being used to support highly human intensive, mostly customer experience use cases, which we can get into as this progresses.
What would you say, there were any standard presentations or demonstrations that really kind of brought any of that to life?
Well, I led a session in general and a couple of panels as a participant on Wednesday afternoon. And a few of the things that really struck me is how practical the applications were, right? It's very easy in shows and publicity to market long-term, sexy, highly automated results. And yet what I was hearing a lot of was how AI was making human beings more efficient. There was a great statement from, I believe it was Verizon, where he was saying, how do I, there people were asking, how do you really get your staff to figure out where to apply it and to accept AI, which can be threatening. And he said, my mantra is, if you've got something that you're doing all the time and it's repetitive and it's dragging you down, and he said, our mantra is, if you hate it, automate it. And these were the kinds of practical approaches that I was seeing all over. And they're the kinds of things that are going to go down well with the mass workforce. They're probably going to deliver pretty high ROI. And they're also not as technically complex, so the likelihood of having success early is rather high. So, I like keep it simple. I like to see things work and have us take, baby steps rather than giant leaps and fall into the abyss.
Patrick, anything stand out for you in terms of anything that you heard or saw from presenters, key quotes?
Yeah, I think probably the standout demonstration was the one that I saw was between ServiceNow and Radcom. They were using basically it was a multi-agent demo. So Radcom's very focused on the network tests and sort of the full life cycle. So they get signaling data, they get user plane data. It was interesting to see the collaboration between what Radcom was doing on the agent side and essentially feeding insights and intelligence into ServiceNow with their workflow engine, which, ServiceNow is optional, in the last few years have really disrupted, if you will, the trouble ticketing side of the market. And so that was an interesting demonstration. I think the industry sort of moving towards multi-agent. So where the hyperscalers have actually done some technical collaboration and they're building out their ecosystem, particularly with a lot of the specialists in the telecommunications industry. This was a clear case where you had somebody like ServiceNow that's not a hyperscaler, but they're integrating agent-to-agent communication and using, some of the emerging protocols to coordinate a lot of those workflow tasks.
Yeah, interesting. Something I'd like to ask both of you actually is to clarify something that I've been hearing some degree of confusion about in the marketplace. I see the word agentic and Gen AI sometimes being used interchangeably. I don't think that's quite right, but I'm interested in your views. Are these two things that have an intersection set, or are they totally different ideas, or how would you just separate out for people the distinction between generative AI and agents, especially the sort of multi-agent framework you're talking about?
Yeah. So from my point of view, generative AI requires a prompt. So you're prompting the agent, and you get potentially a new response that actually helps you do your job better. The Copilot's probably the best example there, and that's where I was saying earlier, where you can put natural language processing interface on the front end, and it actually helps people in customer care do their job faster, close tickets faster, resolve issues, etc. Excuse me. On the agentic side, Robert, I think that's something that Grant and I have been talking about. That's where you start to assume an independence, right? So you almost turn over the workflow task to an agent, and there's a bit of trust in doing that. So the agent itself may, for example, pick up an anomaly in the network. It could be due to, let's say, somebody did a configuration change, but it actually impacted the service. And so, in that sort of scenario, you might say, okay, the agent's acting independently, and it actually can call a function to reconfigure the network or back off the change that was implemented in the example I just cited. So the human's pretty much out of the loop. And I think that scenario is still probably 3 or 4 years out in our industry, mostly because of the trust, that the ability to make sure the agent doesn't do something, or these agents don't do something that are going to ripple through and impact other services. And I think that's that sort of scenario will need a lot of proving to before we get to implementation.
Yeah, yeah. Grant, I know that one of the sessions you mentioned that you moderated was specifically about autonomous networks and self-optimizing networks. There was a pretty impressive list of panelists on that. You had Nokia, Accenture, Netcracker, Verizon Business, AT&T, I think were there as well. ServiceNow are part of that. How much did that focus in on these kind of questions about the length of time it's going to take before we get this level of autonomy, or the use of agents, or just to give us a bit of a flavor of that session? How did that go?
There wasn't a lot of discussion about the time frame itself explicitly, but implicitly there was a lot, right? Because much of the real discussion was about the journey, not the end, right? And how much, time had to be spent on getting good quality data, on changing processes to be appropriate for automation, for educating people to accept automation and work hand in glove with automation. Back to, if you hate it, automate it. There was actually remarkably little about creating truly autonomous networks in it. Most of the use cases there were dealing with customer experience, or the customer experience being impacted by changes to the network. And in each and every case, the agent was not truly working autonomously. It was informing a human being. And in fact, to add to what Patrick was saying about Gen AI versus Agentic AI, I would draw less of a distinction at this moment in time, because we're early days, on whether it works independently of a human, and more on, like, Gen AI is very broad. You can often throw almost any question at it within its defined scope, where agents tend to be built for a very specific task. So specific task and focus on a specifically focused data set. I think the second real key is that they have the workflow to know where to get the input data. And there was also a lot of talk in the panel across all participants of garbage in, garbage out, right? Data is critical. Patrick caught on to early and published a research note that I think everybody might want to reference and read. And the third thing, which is something also that Patrick and I had long discussions on, is that many of the agents are stateful, so that they know what came before and can take one set of data and improve it with a second set of data, and or learn from their past actions and learnings. So those to me are three real differences: focus, workflow, state. But the panel focused heavily on people, process, and data, not on the agents or the Gen AI. That was kind of, we got that. How do we make it work?
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I agree with that. That last point about learning is one that doesn't seem, in my opinion, to get enough attention. If there's not a learning mechanism, then it can't be an agent, just by principle. But it's one that I think we'll see played out in more detail going forward. Grant brought up the topic of data there. Patrick, I knew you were in a session with Snowflake on data, a workshop that they held. Have they got a pretty clear view on the role and the governance and the issues perhaps that Grant was talking about there?
Yes. So Snowflake is what I would classify as a supplier that built a position on the enterprise network and is now moving into the telco vertical. And so when you look at Snowflake, they operate in the cloud. They provide, independence. So you can bring any, private or public cloud. They'll operate against the data. So they're pretty much a data store company. But one of the things that they're doing is they're building out their ecosystem so that they have the right sort of specific data in the telecommunications environment. And as part of the workshop there, they were bringing together some of the partnerships that they have. They had ProDAP present. There was a session with Enterprise Web, which is a smaller sort of disruptive supplier that focused on knowledge graphs. something that Snowflake finds very valuable. And so, they understand in order to get the outcomes that we're looking at, if we're talking about automation or AI, you have to have the right you have to have the structured data, but also more and more you're seeing unstructured data come in. And then you have to understand the relationship of that data to the task that you're trying to get done if you're moving down this automation path. And I think that's, their role will be critical to get the performance and the outcomes that we're looking at for some of these agents that get deployed over the next few years.
Yeah, yeah. I guess, from the comments that you've provided today and in some of the research, my sense is that there's actually a pretty good understanding of all the piece parts that are now required to get to, a high level of network autonomy. And there's some Gen AI in there for sure. There's some data in there. We're not talking agents. We seem to, I think, have our arms around what the recipe is. We've now got to get cooking. I can put it simply. Is that your sense that we're no longer in the realm of speculating or imagining? We're pretty much into the engineering at this point, even if it's going to take a little while to put all that together and to bake it. Are you pretty confident about that?
Yeah, I think the proof points for us, and this is something that our clients will get access to later in the year, is to look at tracking the AI deployments by operators. So there's been a lot of proof of concepts and betas. Now we're kind of moving into deployment. That's a topic that came up. Grant and I had a conversation with Susan White at Netcracker, and she was talking about the actual deployments that they have at operators. So it's kind of, it's that promise of, moving away from POCs into, okay, here's the real world deployments and here's how it's actually performing in these operators. And I think that's what we should expect to see over the next year in our conversations with operators that are looking to deploy this. Grant's comment around, if you don't like a particular task, then automate it. That's going to be a big driver for the buyers of this technology. And then the suppliers got to deliver on that. So, what are they delivering that actually provides better outcomes? We've done TCOs and ROIs. So this is something that I think the industry will pivot towards. And it's part of the research that we're doing. Like, go out and find data points that prove out where there's some success in the marketplace. And look at those specific use cases that are actually going to drive the industry forward.
Great. Excellent. Grant, anything else on the upcoming research side? Patrick's mentioned at least one report there. Is there anything else further that you want to make people aware of at this point coming up later in the year?
I think the main things I'd like to point out is that, we've had a series of reports on autonomy, taking probably a deeper dive than anybody's ever done. That's why it took 3 reports. And the third part, which is really looking at the state of the market, the state of the suppliers, the state of consumption by CSPs, the state of maturity of industry organizations like the TMF and Etsy and all of those is, I think it's out, actually.
Yeah.
I think we had a deadline for a large Asian technical conference. But that series is worth looking at, because one caution I want to make to everyone is AI is not a panacea. We don't say, boy, that autonomy stuff was tough, but now we can throw an AI at it and wash our hands. AI is simply going to plug into a proper autonomous loop in the network anyway, very much like any other algorithm, whether it's a search algorithm, a complex rule set, and work about the same way. It's going to be great at some point, but I think people should look to that. And certainly Patrick and I are doing the work where we're looking at where are the use cases that are initially going to deployment and scale, and what preparation are the leading suppliers making for that. And that will be out later on this year. And just adding one trend on what Patrick was saying at the end from the conversations with Netcracker and Amdocs and IBM, quite a few others at the show, is there's a lot of focus now on ROI, where can you use this to get a return? Not where can I use it that's cool, but where can I use it to get a return? And somewhat counterintuitively, until you think about it, and then you say, well, that should have been obvious. It's actually the areas of low sophistication and low automation where AI is proving its mettle today, where there are a lot of human steps that can be automated, where there may not be even enough humans to do it. A great example is security, complex network configurations, where, the guys and gals that really understand that are unicorns, and we need lots of unicorns. So let's not assume that it's all going to be super sophisticated initially. We may be cutting our teeth on being able to codify and collect a lot of data and solve highly repetitive problems. The one that I probably heard more about than anything else was dealing with customer inquiries, largely about bills. And this has been a consistent theme.
Yes. While you guys were getting back to work after Dallas, John Abraham and I were at an event run by Endox. That was certainly a big theme in the event that they were hosting for us. Agentic AI and particularly some of those bill queries, some interesting examples, case studies of work that they're doing. But John and I have a separate research note coming on that very, very shortly. So certainly by the time most folks will have heard this podcast, that will be there.
Yeah, just I know you're going to be attending some events in the European area, so maybe a quick overview of what you got coming up in the next 8 weeks, where we may be able to meet up with some folks in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a few things coming up. We'll be at the Ericsson OSS BSS Summit in London in early October. That's a very interesting event that I know has been quite rich with content and examples in the past. We'll also have a presence briefly at the Connected Britain event, which is held in London at the end of this month too. We'll be involved in Telecom TV Great Telco Debate early in December as well. And we'll be at the Network X event in Paris coming up middle of October as well. So plenty of opportunity to meet with folks and take the temperature on what's going on and highlight some things that are innovative, interesting, and really progressing the industry, particularly in these areas: agentic, AI, automation, autonomy, all hot topics that I know there'll be a lot of interest in those, all good talking points. So that'll keep us busy through to early 2026. Right. Excellent. I'm aware next year is going to be one event busier. We just heard this morning that the FutureNet series, John Cummings and team are going to be coming to the US, to New York City in November next year.
I did see that.
Anyone who knows, I think anyone who knows Appledore certainly knows that we have a high regard for the FutureNet series. So America was the one market that they didn't have a presence in. So it's interesting to see them arriving there. So yeah, that'll be going to watch out for next year. I'm not sure of the exact date, but I know it's going to be November. So that'll be interesting. Another thing for the diary for 2026. Okay, gentlemen, always good to catch up with you. Thank you very much for your insights today from Dallas. I encourage people to check out the research note, check out the volume 3 of the Principles of Autonomous Networks, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.
Okay, great.